Imagine bringing home a German Shepherd puppy, your new best friend, full of energy and life. But then, one day something strange happens. Your puppy, who's just a few months old, comes back home with an identical stray. Not just any stray, but a puppy that looks exactly like yours. Is it a coincidence, or is there a deeper connection between these two dogs? What happens next will leave you speechless. Get ready for a story of love, loyalty, and a twist of fate that you won't forget. But first, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss a heartwarming story like this one. Sarah had always dreamed of having a German Shepherd. The breed's loyalty, intelligence, and protective nature were qualities she admired. And when she finally got the chance to adopt Max, she couldn't have been happier. Max was a bundle of energy, his fur a perfect mix of black and tan, and his eyes, deep, expressive, and full of wonder. From the moment he came into her life, he became her companion, her best friend. Max's playful energy filled Sarah's home, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. The two of them were inseparable. Max followed Sarah everywhere, whether it was a walk around the neighborhood or lounging on the couch at the end of a long day. They were a team, and Sarah couldn't imagine life without him. One afternoon, as Sarah and Max were out for their usual walk in the park, something caught her attention. Max, normally so energetic and carefree, suddenly froze. His ears stood up, and his body stiffened. He was staring across the park, where a small, scruffy German Shepherd puppy sat on the grass, looking lost and alone. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. There was something about that puppy that made her stomach churn. It wasn't just the fact that it was another German Shepherd. It was the undeniable resemblance. The same black and tan fur, the same bright eyes, and even the same playful stance. This stray puppy looked exactly like Max. Max barked excitedly, pulling at his leash as he tried to run toward the puppy. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. She'd never seen a stray dog in the park before, and something about this situation felt unusual. But seeing Max's eager expression, she decided to approach. As she got closer, the stray puppy remained sitting, watching her cautiously, but with a flicker of curiosity. "Hey there, little one," Sarah said softly, crouching down to offer her hand. The puppy looked up at her, and after a few seconds of hesitation, he cautiously trotted forward, nuzzling her hand. Max immediately trotted over, tail wagging, and began sniffing the stray puppy. It was clear that he recognized something familiar about him. Sarah couldn't explain it, but the connection between the two puppies was undeniable. The stray looked so much like Max, and the way they interacted, it was as if they had known each other for years. Sarah's heart melted at the sight. "You're just as cute as Max," she murmured. She couldn't leave this puppy here, not when he was so clearly in need of help. The little dog was thin and had matted fur, and it was obvious he had been living on the streets for some time. After a moment of contemplation, Sarah decided she couldn't let the puppy stay there alone. "Come on, buddy," she said, gently scooping the stray up into her arms. He didn't resist, his small body relaxing as she cradled him close. Max, now fully engaged, barked excitedly, as if to say, "Look, Mom, we have a new friend." The two puppies, side by side, began to bond instantly, and Sarah knew this wasn't just a random encounter. There was something special about the way they connected, something that couldn't be explained by mere coincidence. On the way home, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the resemblance between the two puppies. Could they really be related? She had to know. But for now, all she could do was focus on getting the stray cleaned up and settled in. The following morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of Max's excited barks. But there was something different about the way he barked today. It wasn't his usual playful greeting. It was more insistent, like he was trying to get her attention. Still groggy from a late night, Sarah rubbed her eyes and stumbled to the living room, where she found both puppies staring at her expectantly. Max was sitting by the door, wagging his tail furiously, and the stray, now named Rocky by Sarah, was pacing around, his eyes darting back and forth between Max and the door. All right, Sarah mumbled, half laughing at their eager faces. She opened the door, and Max darted outside in an instant, with Rocky right behind him, following like a shadow. As the two puppies played in the yard, Sarah stood by the window, watching them. It was a strange feeling. watching Max with another dog who looked exactly like him. They were so similar, yet there were small differences. Max was more energetic, constantly chasing after sticks and balls, while Rocky, although playful, seemed a little more reserved, a bit more cautious. It was clear that he had been through more hardship than Max. The thought lingered in Sarah's mind. Could these two really be brothers? Was it possible that Rocky had been separated from his family at a young age? There was something about the way Max and Rocky interacted that made Sarah think they shared a deeper connection than just their physical resemblance. But it wasn't just the bond between the two dogs that fascinated Sarah. She had noticed something else, something she hadn't fully processed the day before. When she had brought Rocky inside, she noticed how comfortable he seemed, how quickly he adjusted to her home. But more than that, he had a calm, almost wise demeanor, an old soul in a young body. There was an unspoken depth to him that Max, for all his energy, seemed to lack. Sarah decided to take them both to the vet the next day for a checkup. She needed to make sure Rocky was healthy and safe, and she was hoping to get some answers. The idea of their connection still haunted her. It wasn't just about their striking similarity. It was the way they acted around each other, the way they seemed to understand each other without words. At the vet, the staff was just as confused as Sarah. It's rare to find two German Shepherds that look so identical, the vet said as she examined both puppies. But I wouldn't jump to conclusions. There are plenty of German Shepherds that look alike. Let's run some tests and we'll see if there's any way to confirm if they're siblings. The tests would take a couple of days, but Sarah couldn't help but feel impatient. Every moment spent with Rocky only deepened her attachment to him. Despite being a stray, he was a good puppy, calm, gentle, and somehow wise beyond his age. He had a presence about him that Max couldn't quite match. Later that evening, Sarah sat on the couch, both puppies curled up beside her. Max's head rested on her lap, his usual playful energy subdued after a long day of playing outside. Rocky lay beside her, his eyes half closed as he leaned into her. The soft sound of his breathing, a reminder of just how far he'd come from his days on the streets. Sarah ran her fingers through their fur, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She had never imagined that her life would change so suddenly, so dramatically. Max and Rocky, two puppies that had somehow found their way to her, one through adoption, the other through chance, had brought a new sense of purpose into her life. But there was more to their story than met the eye, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. As Sarah sat there thinking about the future, Max lifted his head and nudged her hand, his eyes filled with something that looked like reassurance. It was as though he knew exactly what she was thinking, that no matter what the future held, everything would be okay. The next day, Sarah would finally get the answers she had been waiting for. But little did she know, the revelation would not only change her understanding of the bond between Max and Rocky, but would also alter the course of their lives forever. The next day, Sarah found herself pacing nervously in the waiting room of the veterinary clinic. Max and Rocky were by her side, both sitting patiently, as if they could sense her anxiety. She had been to the vet countless times with Max, but this felt different. This time, it wasn't just a routine checkup. It was a quest for answers. She glanced down at the paperwork in her hands, the test results for both dogs. The technician had told her the results would come back soon, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The connection between Max and Rocky was too strong to be a coincidence. Their bond seemed deeper than just being two dogs of the same breed. Max, always energetic, had been calm today, sitting close to Sarah, his head resting against her leg. Rocky, on the other hand, seemed more distant, his eyes darting around the room, his body language tense. Sarah had noticed that ever since she brought him home, Rocky was a little more on edge than Max, as though he was carrying the weight of something unspoken, something hidden beneath his gentle exterior. The door to the back room opened, and the vet, Dr. Campbell, stepped into the waiting area, holding a folder. "Sarah, we've got the results. It's time we talk about what we found." Sarah's heart raced, her palms sweating as she stood up to greet the vet. "Is everything okay? Are they healthy?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dr. Campbell gave her a reassuring smile. "Both puppies are perfectly healthy, but there's something else you should know. We ran a genetic test on both of them, as you requested, and I have some surprising news." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, unable to hide the worry in her voice. Max and Rocky are not just similar in appearance, Dr. Campbell said, her voice calm yet full of gravity. They're biologically related. They're half-brothers. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. Half-brothers? She repeated, her mind racing. But how? Dr. Campbell nodded. It seems that Rocky was born to a female German Shepherd who was part of a working dog program. For some reason, he was separated from his mother at a very young age and ended up on the streets. Max, on the other hand, was adopted into your family, raised in a home with a loving owner, but they share the same father. Sarah could hardly believe it. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring these two dogs back together. Two puppies, born to different fates, who had found their way back to each other in the most unexpected way. As Sarah absorbed the news, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of wonder and awe. She had always known that Max had an extraordinary connection to Rocky, but now that she knew the truth, it made everything seem even more profound. They weren't just two puppies who looked alike. They were family. Is there any chance their paths crossed before this? Sarah asked, her mind still reeling. Possibly, Dr. Campbell replied. Dogs have a strong sense of smell and can remember familiar scents. It's possible that Max and Rocky have met before without you realizing it, but it's also possible they simply found each other by chance. Either way, their connection is undeniable. As Sarah left the clinic with both dogs by her side, she couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn of events that had brought them together. Max and Rocky, two dogs, raised in completely different circumstances, yet bound by blood and fate. She couldn't explain why they had ended up in her life, but she knew one thing for sure. This was no coincidence. Back home, Sarah let the dogs out into the yard, giving them space to play and explore. As Max bounded across the grass, his usual enthusiasm evident, Rocky watched from the porch, his gaze focused on Max. Sarah noticed the subtle difference in how they interacted. Max was the free spirit, running without care, while Rocky observed with quiet intensity. But when they were together, there was an undeniable connection, a shared history that neither of them fully understood yet. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she thought about the news. Max and Rocky were family, but there was more to their story that hadn't been uncovered yet. What had happened to Rocky before he had ended up on the streets? What had he experienced that made him so cautious, so reserved? And why had they ended up together, under such strange circumstances? The answers would come, Sarah knew. But for now, she was content to let the bond between Max and Rocky grow. Whatever their pasts had been, they were now together, and that was all that mattered. A few days passed since Sarah had learned the truth about Max and Rocky. Life had returned to a kind of peaceful routine, with the puppies getting along wonderfully. Max, as usual, had boundless energy, always playing fetch and chasing squirrels around the yard. Rocky, on the other hand, that was more laid back. He still had moments of nervousness, but Sarah had noticed that whenever Max was near, he seemed to calm down, as if Max was his anchor. However, something was starting to bother Sarah. Lately, she had been receiving strange phone calls late at night. The caller never said anything, just an eerie silence on the other end of the line before the line went dead. She tried to ignore it, but the calls kept coming, and with every call, her sense of unease grew stronger. One morning, while she was outside in the backyard, watching Max and Rocky play, she noticed something odd. A man was standing across the street, watching her house. He was leaning against a car, his eyes locked on the puppies. Sarah's stomach turned. He was too far away to make out any details, but the way he was staring was unsettling. Max, ever the protective pup, noticed the man too. He began to growl low in his throat, his body stiffening as he stared across the yard. Rocky, though usually more reserved, stood next to Max, his eyes following the man's every move. Sarah quickly ushered both puppies inside, her heart racing. She stood by the window, her hand pressed to the cool glass, watching the man for what felt like an eternity. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. When the man finally turned and walked away, Sarah felt a sense of relief, but also a creeping suspicion. Something wasn't right. She wasn't sure if he was just a random passerby or if he had been watching her and the dogs for a reason. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to take any chances. That evening, Sarah decided to be cautious. She made sure to double-check all the locks on the doors and windows. She even installed a new security system just to be safe. But as she settled down for the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man from across the street wasn't the only danger she had to worry about. Late that night, as Sarah drifted off to sleep, a sudden crash jolted her awake. It was coming from the backyard. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rushed to the window, barely able to see through the darkness. And then she saw it, a shadow moving swiftly across the yard, just outside the reach of the dim porch light. Max and Rocky were barking furiously, their voices filled with alarm. "Stay here," Sarah whispered to the puppies as she grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping cautiously onto the porch. Her breath caught in her throat as she swept the flashlight across the yard. She could hear the faint rustling of leaves and the dog's growls growing louder, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. Suddenly, a shape darted out of the darkness, and Sarah's flashlight caught the glint of something metallic. A figure emerged from behind a tree, and she gasped when she recognized him, the man from across the street. Her heart raced as he approached the fence, a malicious grin on his face. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. And in that moment, Sarah knew that this man wasn't just a random stranger. He was after something, and he wasn't going to stop until he got it. "Get away from my house," Sarah shouted, her voice trembling with fear and anger. But the man didn't move. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, silver object, a knife. The blade glinted under the moonlight as he took a step closer. Max and Rocky, sensing the danger, lunged at the fence, their growls now deafening. Max was the first to charge, his teeth bared and his body coiled with aggression. Rocky was right behind him, his eyes wild with protective fury. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. "Back off!" Sarah shouted again, this time with more authority, her voice trembling with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The man hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback by the dog's fierceness. He took a step back, but then, to Sarah's shock, he turned and fled into the darkness. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, trying to catch her breath. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted, but she knew one thing for certain. Max and Rocky had just saved her life. She rushed to the backyard, her hands shaking as she hugged both puppies tightly, their bodies warm and comforting against hers. Max and Rocky had always been more than just dogs to her. They were family, her protectors. The tension that had been building for days finally began to fade, but a new sense of dread settled in Sarah's heart. This was just the beginning. Whoever that man was, he wasn't going to stop. And now, Sarah had no choice but to protect her new family, Max, Rocky, and herself, from whatever danger lay ahead. The following day, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Despite the tranquility of the morning, she found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, checking her phone, and scanning the streets outside. The strange man had left her uneasy, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just his presence that disturbed her. It was the strange feeling that Max and Rocky's connection might be tied to something deeper, something Sarah didn't fully understand. As Sarah sat in her living room, her mind racing with questions, Max and Rocky were curled up together on the couch, asleep. The sight of them was a reminder of the bond they shared. Strong, undeniable. She had never seen two puppies so closely connected, almost as if they were drawn together by fate. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, snapping her from her thoughts. Sarah hesitated for a moment before heading to the door. She peered through the peephole, her heart leaping in her chest when she saw the man from across the street. Her instincts told her to stay calm, but the fear began to rise in her throat. She opened the door slowly, trying to mask the unease she was feeling. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man was older than she had initially thought, his face weathered and rough, his eyes dark and guarded. He looked around nervously before meeting her gaze. "Are those your dogs?" he asked, his voice low, almost too quiet. "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice shaky but firm. "Max and Rocky. Why?" The man glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "I need to talk to you about them. About what they are." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What do you know about my dogs?" The man took a step closer, lowering his voice even further. I know who they are. They're not just any dogs. They're part of something bigger, something you don't fully understand yet. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The cryptic message only deepened her confusion. What are you talking about? The man hesitated, looking like he was weighing his next words carefully. I can't explain everything right now, but I can tell you this much. You're in danger. Those dogs, they're part of a bigger picture, a dangerous one. Before Sarah could respond, the man turned and quickly walked away, disappearing down the street, leaving her standing there, frozen, with 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. The rest of the day felt like a blur. Sarah couldn't focus on anything, her mind consumed by the man's strange warning. She kept replaying his words over and over. They're part of something bigger, something you don't fully understand yet. Max and Rocky were still the picture of innocence, playing with their toys and cuddling up to her on the couch. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she was missing, something hidden in the depths of their past, something dark that she wasn't ready to uncover. As the sun set, Sarah sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone for any clue that could explain the man's cryptic words. But the more she searched, the more confused she became. There was no mention of anything like what he had said. Her mind kept racing, and that was when she saw it. A name. The article was about a German Shepherd breeding program, one that specialized in training dogs for special purposes. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the details. The program was said to produce dogs with extraordinary traits, but it had been shut down years ago due to a series of strange incidents. According to the article, some dogs from the program had mysteriously disappeared, and one of the puppies had been stolen from a sanctuary. Her heart dropped. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Was it possible that Max and Rocky were connected to this program? She needed to know more. The next morning, Sarah decided to take action. She reached out to the local animal rescue and asked if they had any information about the history of Max and Rocky. The woman on the other end of the line hesitated at first, but after some convincing, she told Sarah that they were actually part of a rescue operation that had saved several dogs from an illegal breeding ring years ago. The dogs were special, the woman said cryptically. We didn't know the full extent of it at the time, but some of them exhibited strange behaviors, and the truth is, not all of them made it out. Max and Rocky were the lucky ones, but there's more, and I think you need to know the rest. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she listened closely. The man who visited you yesterday? His name is Lucas. He was part of the operation that helped take down the breeding ring, but he left when things got too dangerous. He was trying to protect the dogs. There's a reason Max and Rocky look so much alike. They were born together, and they share more than just a physical resemblance. They were trained to be more than pets. The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet as she processed this revelation. Her mind raced. What was she really dealing with? How had she unknowingly become the caretaker of two dogs that had been bred for something beyond her understanding? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden bark from Max, followed by a frantic growl from Rocky. Sarah's heart stopped. She rushed to the window, her pulse racing, and froze. Standing in the middle of her front yard was Lucas, but something was different about him. His eyes were wild, and he looked unkempt, as if he hadn't slept in days. But it wasn't just him. There were two other men with him, and they were holding something that made Sarah's blood run cold. A cage. Max and Rocky were now on the porch, barking furiously, their tails wagging with an urgency that only Sarah recognized. They were trying to protect her again. She rushed outside, her heart pounding. "What is going on?" she shouted, her voice shaking. Lucas's eyes were filled with desperation. "Sarah, you have to listen to me. They're coming for the dogs. They want them back." "Who?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising with fear. "The people who bred them. They'll stop at nothing to get them back. You don't understand what's at stake. These dogs are worth more than you can imagine, but not in the way you think. They're not just pets. They're part of a much larger plan." He took a deep breath before continuing. "The only reason Max and Rocky are still safe is because you're here with them. But I can't protect you anymore. You need to leave. Now." Suddenly, Sarah realized the gravity of the situation. The dogs she thought were just lovable puppies were actually part of something much darker. Her world, once so simple and comforting, had been turned upside down in an instant. She had to make a choice, one that would change her life forever. Max and Rocky were by her side, looking up at her with loyalty and love, as if to say, "We'll protect you. Just trust us." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she hugged them both tightly. She couldn't leave them, not now, not after everything they had been through together. But where could they go, and how could she ever protect them from what was coming? The truth was clearer than ever. Max and Rocky weren't just her puppies. They were her family. And no matter what happened next, she would stand by them, ready to face whatever danger lay ahead. Sarah stood with Max and Rocky by her side, ready to face whatever came next. She knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Together, they were unstoppable. Whatever the future held, they would face it as a family. If this story inspired you, remember, love and loyalty are all that matter in the end. Subscribe, like, and share if you believe in the power of family.